All right, welcome to Dicejunkies. This is Blood X, and I'm joined today with Hugh, and we have a very special guest today, Mr. Alan Dean Foster. Um, uh, Alan Dean Foster has written over 138 fiction and novels, plus also some nonfiction and fiction short works. Um, the reason we reached out to you is because of your work on the series for Star Wars, Star Trek, the Alien franchise. So you definitely qualify for our geek culture niche, which is kind of what we're known for. So thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time, Mr. Foster.
Pleasure to be here, guys.
All right, so I want to start it off with one of the novels that you may actually get asked a lot of questions about, which is the Splinter the Mind's Eye. And it's considered to be the very first entry into the Star Wars expanded universe. Um, how much does it mean to you to kind of blaze a trail for other authors to follow you into the Star Wars expanded universe?
Of course, when the book was written, nobody was thinking about blazing any trails. The idea with Splinter the Mind's Eye, the concept behind it, was that George, when he was thinking ahead, wanted to have more material available for people on the assumption that the film Star Wars would be successful. That included such things as comics, spin-off toys and such, and he wanted a book. Also, there was the thought that the book could be made into a low-budget film if Star Wars was neither an enormous success nor a huge failure, so that you could adapt the book cheaply, utilizing as many of the props and costumes and such from the first film as you possibly could. That was an instruction that was given to me by George. He said, the only thing I want you to keep in mind when you write the book is that it should be something that could be filmed on a low budget. So that's why I set Splinter on a fog-shrouded planet. Remember, no CGI back in those days.
Right.
And a lot of it also takes place underground. These are places where your backgrounds are fairly easy to set up in a studio and not expensive to film. So it was an interesting way to approach a novel from the very beginning. But as far as blazing a trail, nobody knew what would come after. Nobody even knew if there'd be a second film. It's easy to think about these things in retrospect, but at the time, nobody said, "Well, we're going to blaze a trail here by having this first sequel book come out, and then there'll be 500 sequel books to follow." Nobody had a thought in the world about that.
Right, and what's I found was interesting is that a lot of the content in the book, it appears that you actually had picked from old treatments of Star Wars: A New Hope that weren't used in the film. And I love the fact that this is the first time we're actually introduced to Kyber Crystals, which was in your book. Did George give you the information about the Kyber Crystals used for lightsabers in the Force, or did you come up with that on your own?
To be perfectly honest with you, there were a lot of discussions at the time, and I don't remember whether it was myself or George who came up with that. I'm going to say lightly that it was myself, because there was no mention of anything called a Kyber Crystal in the Star Wars screenplay that I worked from, and nobody said anything to me about it. But we needed kind of a MacGuffin, for those of you familiar with film lore, in the story, and kind of popped up with the Kyber Crystal. The reason I spelled it that way, because it's spelled differently now, I believe, is I didn't want anybody to confuse it with the Kyber Pass in Afghanistan.
Okay.
So that's why the alternate spelling. But I thought it would be a fun thing to play with. I thought the idea of having something that could magnify the Force would be a useful thing to play around with, and that's where the Kyber Crystal came into the story.
So I have you to thank for that. I love the Kyber Crystals concept. Being a old D&D and fantasy fan, I came into knowledge of Kyber Crystals on KOTOR, a Knights of the Republic game where you built your own lightsaber, and I fell in love with the concept of Kyber Crystals. So awesome. That was easily one of my favorite items. I hunted down the rare orange Kyber Crystal because it made it look like my lightsaber was a piece of the sun. And like I lived to get that orange Kyber crystal. The kind of orange yellow Kyber crystal color was beautiful. Looked like a setting sun.
I think my favorite was the silver one. That one was always fun to get as well.
True.
So I do have a question, and we've been talking for a while now, even before the recording, and I'm very curious about your answer to this question, which I've discussed with Mark and Q on the show in the past. But as an author, you've written both fantasy and science fiction books, and I'm curious to see how you can answer one of these debates that we have: is Star Wars science fiction or is Star Wars science fantasy, in your opinion?
That's a fairly easy one for me. Star Wars is science fantasy
Okay.
because we'd like it to be science fiction. But in science fiction, you have to have at least a certain percentage of science.
Right.
And there's very little science in Star Wars, deliberately so. Remember, George originally wanted to make Flash Gordon, a new Flash Gordon. There's very little science in Flash Gordon. And what you do is you have all the trappings and appearances of science fiction without the science. And that's not even taking into account something like the Force. I'm talking about the hardware and the astronomical aspects and the fact that, people have been over and over this for decades. The fact that you have ships banking in space, like World War II fighters, when there's nothing to bank against,
Right.
and on and on and on and on. So what you have is it looks like science fiction, but it's really fantasy. So call it science fantasy.
I think me and Q agree with you on that one, and it's interesting how other people that I've talked to in the past, no, it's science fiction. I'm like, okay, where's the science aspects to back up your claim? Star Trek is sci-fi. It has a lot of science involved with it, a lot of theories, and even we have a lot of inventions today based on Gene Roddenberry's designs back in the 60s. This topic, I know we have to dance around a little bit, but I do want to bring this to our audience. And just a short summary for those that aren't intimately familiar with it. When Disney purchased Lucasfilm in 2012, they apparently decided that they didn't purchase the contract, so to speak. So royalties weren't being paid for a lot of the published works from authors from the expanded universe. And same thing with 20th Century Fox acquisition 2019. I know that recently this has all been settled with Disney, and I know that there are certain things you can and can't talk about, but I am kind of curious what you can elaborate regarding this issue that you wanted to keep quiet, but had to go public in order to get something resolved. So what can you share with the audience regarding this?
Well, first of all, it has been resolved to both parties' mutual satisfaction. What originally happened, apparently, was with these two giant acquisitions by Disney, things tend to fall through the cracks. This happens with any large corporate merger or acquisition. The problem was that it stayed in the cracks, and there was no way that my agent, Virginia Kid Agency, could get anyone at Disney to go into the cracks. We're really stretching this analogy, but what the hell? Go into the cracks and dig out the tiny fragment of change that I was owed. And it then came down to someone from Disney. And please keep in mind, we're talking about bean counters way, way, way down the corporate ladder, kind of the accounting department version of the Mines of Moria. I mean, way down
deep
there. Just decided that it could be ignored. And we weren't going to stand for that. So we brought in the grievance committee from the Science Fiction Writers of America, which is a very proactive organization where writers' rights are concerned. And lo and behold, they couldn't shake anything loose either. The apparent idea from whoever they were talking to at Disney was that, well, yes, we acquired the properties owned by 20th Century Fox and Lucasfilm, but we didn't acquire all of the obligations. And this immediately roused people who otherwise wouldn't have been interested in the entire matter because it suddenly becomes a point of law as to what's in a contract and what's not in a contract. And if it's in the contract, um, you have the right to go into those cracks and dig out the little bit of royalty money you're owed. We tried and tried over a considerable period of time to get someone to get back to us to acknowledge that fact. Never happened. And that was when it was decided by all hands to go public with the issue, at which point there was a certain amount of global outrage. And the people we had been talking to at Disney were replaced by someone a little higher up on the accounting ladder. And not to go on and on about it, because we could,
Yeah.
satisfaction was obtained, in the course of which it was discovered that I was not the only creative person in that particular accounting boat, and that there were other writers, other creators, who were also due back royalties as a result of the acquisition of Fox and Lucasfilm by Disney, some of whom have also been paid and had their complaints dealt with and satisfied. And at this point, it's an over and done deal for me and for these other people, but there are still people coming forth who feel that they need attention paid to them as well. And the important thing to come out of this really was not the total amount of money, which is pocket change from the couches in the executive lounge at Disney headquarters in Burbank, but the important thing is that there's a principle at stake here, which hopefully has been nailed down a little bit more clearly, not just for Disney, but for any other company in a similar situation. It's important to have precedent in these matters. And when you have precedent, then hopefully other people don't have to go through the same thing that you went through, because they can point to the precedent and say, well, look, this is how it works. And if Disney can accommodate it, then, Joe Skunk's production in Lower Bathurst, England, should comply as well.
As a business major, I'm so glad that got cleared up, because I already saw the massive amount of shenanigans if a precedent was set that you did not acquire the obligations. Because then companies could literally just juggle back and forth and never pay anyone. Like, it could be, I sell this to you, you sell it back to me, and now I don't have to pay any of these people. I mean, it was a massive legal issue. And that's why I flipped out, and I'm one of the outraged. I was amongst the outraged, because I looked at this and said, oh, God, no, this will be like the worst. I mean, at this point, it would mean that all non-large businesses, all writers who weren't world famous, and had huge companies behind them, would no longer have any way to ensure they'd be paid. It could have been just devastating for the business.
I'm no socialist, but there are certain aspects of uncontrolled capitalism that need to be addressed. I mean, every time while I was going through all this, in my mind, I was thinking of things like the people who used to work for Kmart for, say, 20 years, and suddenly Kmart gets bought by a big hedge fund. And all the hedge fund is interested in a lot of these cases, is the real estate and the property, the real property that they can sell off, make a quick profit, and dissolve everything else. And that means nobody gets their pension paid. And that's what really ticks me off about some of these giant mergers, is there are people on the lower end, real people whose lives are completely disrupted, and they have nowhere to go for recourse, because it's all perfectly legal to do this sort of thing. I mean, you buy an abandoned amusement park in New Jersey, shall we say, and you close down the amusement park, everybody gets fired, nobody gets their pension, because all of that property is rolled over into a new company that's going to build a warehouse facility there. And those people are just lost. There's got to be a way to address that properly, so that people can go to work in the knowledge that if their company gets bought out or rolled into a larger company, they don't lose everything they've worked for.
If you were working to retire, that would be horrible. But no, you're right. I mean, imagine if you were working toward retirement and that happened right before you were going to retire. Like, I'm 2 years away from retirement. My company gets sold. and they terminate everyone, which happens all the time. I've literally been at companies that got bought out, and I usually head for the hills before the merger happens. And I've had people like coworkers with me go, "Oh, they're not going to terminate. They said they're not going to fire anybody. It's not fire anybody." I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to an interview. You might want to no." And then when I get over there, it's like, "Hey, man, they fired everybody," and I'm like, "Yes, they do that. Like they come in, they wipe the staff half the time. They keep a handful of people." They have a preference for the people they keep. We're not going to get into that either. But I definitely didn't feel I was one of the people that was probably going to get to stay. So I usually moved on. And let's just say all the people that I told should look for a job were the people that got let off. So I was like, and I mean, that always used to horrify me because like my mom is working toward retirement. I know someone else that's, I was talking to a coworker recently that said he was very close to retirement. And I mean, but we had budget cuts at where we work. Luckily, it didn't affect us. But I thought about it and said, man, imagine if those budget cuts had caused his position to be removed before he could retire. And I feel like that's a tragedy when that happens.
There's a very fine book. I can't remember the name of it. I can't remember the author. I'm sorry. I read it several years ago. But it deals with the closing and proposed reopening of a GM plant in Michigan. The gal who wrote it interviewed people in this town where there's essentially a one business town, the GM plant, over a period of years while all of these shenanigans were going on. And I'm sorry I can't remember the name of it, but people could find it. It's a real in-depth look at what happens to regular folks' lives when this sort of thing goes on and back and forth. Going to reopen the plant, not going to reopen the plant. The local community gave all kinds of tax breaks to GM because I'm pretty sure it was GM. They're going to reopen the plant. Plant never reopened, and it goes on and on and on. I don't know what the solution to this sort of thing is, but there has to be a way to, protect people. Mm-hmm. And that has nothing to do with fantasy and science fiction, but it's an interesting subject.
I was hoping that it gets fixed, maybe fantasy. But yeah, we got a little side note. But I'm glad to hear that everything got resolved. I'm still going to maintain my stance that I understand that it was the bean counters, but I'm still mad. I'll be mad for a while just because I believe that that when it comes to something so simple as because they were collecting the money, they were still getting money from the sales. So I'm like, when I get my paycheck every month, I look and I go, here's the money for that. Here, I divvy out the money that goes to the people that's owed. Like, boom, here's rent. Here's, for this. Here's for that. And when they got in this money, the first thing that Bean Counter should have did is said, oh, we're getting money from this book. We didn't write this, so I'm pretty sure we owe somebody. Like, to me, I don't believe that, at least after y'all brought it up, I don't believe that no one couldn't have found out. I think somebody could have looked and said, yeah, we're not paying anybody. We definitely owe someone. If $100 appeared in a letter on my doorstep tomorrow, I would immediately track down. I would not just go spend it. I would be like, where'd this come from? What is this about? You don't just take the money and just go, mine. So, but then that's me. And yes, I know it's a huge company, but at the same time, they're also so big that I feel like somebody came to me and said you owed me 1-2% of this. The amount of money was a point, like you said, to them that they could have paid you even if they weren't sure, just to keep good press. I'm also, I've done a lot of marketing training. When I went to college, I did a lot of marketing training. And having a good reputation is a very good idea. I don't know why that's fallen out of current business, that people don't care what their reputation is anymore. But if they had said, let's take care of these guys just to be sure, the probability that the writing association would come to them and trust them more and be willing to work with them more would have increased. So, and then, of course, the fans, like your fans and the other fans, would have immediately had a better impression of Disney. It wasn't worth it for amount of money that they probably literally weren't aware existed. They probably weren't even, they were so busy dealing with the big Star Wars, they probably weren't thinking about the novels. Let's just be real. They probably forgot the novels even. There's probably, y'all are under other. The novels are under other, under the profit there. There's not a description. It's just, parks, movies, products, and then it's other. They could have paid y'all. and not cared and just went, here, what do we owe you? Here, tell people we're nice. You know, so tell people we're nice and thank Disney. And then that's all they had to do. And it's what I would have done.
I think one possible solution, one way to prevent this sort of thing from happening, is for every company of size to have an independent ombudsman office where someone can go directly, bypassing a lot of those lower levels, and say, look, good problem here. Don't want to go public about it. Can you get back to it? Check it out. Get back to us in a week or two. And a lot of problems would be resolved before they became problems. And that's to the company's benefit as much as anybody else's benefit. I'm sure some companies have that sort of an office, but a lot of them don't. So that's my idea for the day, I guess.
That's good. It could be like the way Walmart does it. Walmart's refund department, I found out how it worked because I one time watched a woman bring back half of a birthday cake and get a refund. He remembers this story. She brought half the cake in because the kids didn't like the cake, and she claimed so they only ate half of it. And the lady refunded it. When I got up to the desk, I just said, why did y'all do that? And they said, we have a budget. She said, we have a set amount of budget to just make problems go away for public, to keep our reputation. And the funny thing is, I worked for a business and I had that same budget. They gave me a budget and they said, you keep it under this amount a month, we don't care what you do with it. So there'd be somebody, this thing took my money here. You know, don't even question it here. It's under the budget. Here you go. Disney should have the same thing where they go, this person's come with us. Let's at least check it up to make sure that it's not somebody off the street just trying to get some money. No, this guy's wrote books. We can wiki him. We can wiki Mr. Foster. He wrote this book. His name's right there. Pay him. It's in our budget. We got $10 million. He's asking for a very reasonable amount. Pay him. Boom. And then we write it off as our public relations. Don't think we're evil budget. They need a don't think we're evil budget, and then just use that to pay people.
Also a good solution. Mr. Axe, did you have some more questions?
Well, actually, I thought it's a little bit off a different subject, but one of the things I thought was interesting, and I don't know if it was a ploy to cover up the royalty issue, but when it was mentioned in an interview with a certain person in Lucasfilm who will remain nameless, said that there's no material to pull from, and we're trying to do Star Wars as we go along, which every single Star Wars fan slapped themselves in the face, go, we have all this EU material, and you're saying you have nothing to pull from. There's no written documents that actually give you more Star Wars content, so we're trying to figure out as we go along, which is complete bullshit in my opinion, because there's a whole plethora of material that fans have really just gravitated to. I mean, look at the sales. If you look at the sales of the EU books versus some of the newer content that's come out, it's even the older material outsells it. So that's what people are interested in. And for them not to consider using that content raises a question, do they not want to pay the creator for those characters, for those storylines? Or are you saying that so you can steal it and then put it into a movie and not compensate the original creator of the material? That's where some of the issues that I have as a media member come into play, because if you're stealing someone's material, they need to be compensated. And that's my opinion on that. That's one of the things I wanted to go down before we kind of switch gears here in a second, but I'm going to wait for your response before I go on to my next question.
Depends how your contract is structured. If you do a work for hire and you sign a contract that says the company that's paying you is buying all rights throughout the universe forever to whatever you write under that contract, then there's no way you can come back and say, well, you used my character from this book and you didn't pay me or credit me or anything else. It's a contract. Cuts both ways. I have to get paid because it was in my contract that I get paid royalties on those books. If it was in my contract that I got no royalties, then I have nothing to complain about. I'll give you a personal example. Disney made a little film in which they set part of it on a planet called Mimban.
Mm-hmm.
That's from Splinter the Minds Eye. That's the name of the planet. I never said anything about that because I had no rights to that. I'm flattered that they used it. That's very nice. But I have no legal complaint or legitimate complaint whatsoever. Both my agent and myself read that contract and signed it. Um, if you don't like that arrangement, you don't take the job. As far as them, using material from the expanded universe books, I don't know how any of those contracts are structured. If the contract says, if you do this work, you write this original book about Chewbacca's third uncle, we own all the rights, then that's what you're signing, and you have to live with that and be happy with that. Otherwise, if you don't like it, you can try to change the contract, which I've been down that road as well with these sorts of projects, or you don't do the job. It's not complicated. Now, the other side of the coin, would it be morally right if you took somebody's story, let's say, not just a character, but a whole book out of the expanded universe, and you made that into a film or a television episode, of which there are apparently going to be a great many, both live action and animated, in the Star Wars universe? Would you be morally obligated to at least credit that person and perhaps give them an honorarium, we'll call it, something that doesn't relate to the actual contract at all? I could give specific examples again from Disney. A good one would be DuckTales. And every fan who knows the Duck comics is familiar with this. Most of what's in DuckTales, with the exception of some new added characters, are based on the comics originally of Carl Barks and later of Don Rosa. If they get credited, I didn't see Barks credited in the first seasons of DuckTales at all. And Barks signed the contract. He's working with, Disney copyrighted characters his whole life. Probably not entitled to credit or money or anything else. Would it have been morally and ethically a good thing to have, say, based on characters created by Carl Barks and or Don Rosa? Yes. Would it have been the right thing to do to give them a little piece of change out of that vast well of money that Disney got from selling DuckTales? Sure, but legally they're not obligated. So it's an argument that people can have down there. And it's not just Disney. Every company does this sort of thing.
I have made purchases. I'll be quick. I have bought products. I have books in my house and comic books that I never read. I have bought a ticket to a movie I've never seen. This is solely because of reputation. I will support something if I am a supporter of the business and the practices. I just have to say I'm firmly in the stance of, man, it's not worth it to not do that simple right thing, because ultimately you never know when there'll be a day when you have to depend on the fans to keep you afloat. And your product isn't up to par, but you just need it. I mean, I went to see the Sonic movie. I took both my boys. I did it because they listened to the fans. I'm not a fan of Sonic. I never owned a Sega. But I went to the movie, took the boys to the movie. They enjoyed it. I did that, 3 tickets, based solely on the fact that I said, I am a video game fan, and I don't dislike Sonic, but I was a Mario Brothers guy, grew up with Nintendo. But I was like, I'm going to support this movie because they're trying, because I can. And I think Kickstarter has proven that, and other sites like that have proven that. I went and supported a book that's coming out, and all my friend walked in and said, hey, the guy that wrote this book we like, he's writing another one, and, he's got a Kickstarter. We all went. We immediately. And then we went and we upgraded to the higher package. We kept going up. It's like, I'm going to do 10. Now I'm going to do 50, do 30. And now I'm at 50. I just kept going up the tier because support. It's worth it. It doesn't, like you said, I agree with you that from a moral standpoint, but even from a business, I mean, we tested this out with a faux company during a project, and you can get, look at Apple, reputation. It's amazing what you can do if you can sell yourself a good reputation and get a loyal group. Apple can literally say, we're not going to put a jack for headphones on the phone because we don't feel like it. Still highest selling phone, because they can do that because Apple people are Apple people. They're in. They're like, okay, they must know what they're doing. We trust them. That's what you can do when you have a reputation, but nobody trusts Disney. Disney tell you something, you're going to immediately go, let me go check that. Like, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say them in particular. Large corporations that have not fostered a trustworthy reputation, you don't immediately believe what they say. They don't have your trust. You doubt them, you double check them. When a movie comes out from these big companies, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you were going to be quick. Remember, I just wanted to remind you.
Yeah, I'm done.
But I do want to thank Mr. Foster for joining us today on Dicejunkies. You can definitely check him out on his website, his Facebook page. And Mr. Foster, again, thank you very much for your time. You have been a pleasure to talk to, and absolutely love geeking out with your stories.
Pleasure.
I don't normally like sci-fi, but when I do get into sci-fi, I like it dark. You know, that's the way I like it. Like I mentioned with the horror space. So, what you say there? Need to turn you on?
Oh no, I was being rude when you said you like it dark. I was like I like my women, but that was just me being an ass.